This conversation is not going where I expected it to go, but I'm glad that we're going down this exact direction because I think you're touching on such a unique point that's maybe not talked about enough. This idea of building and delivering value without expectation.
You only get one shot at this life. This is something that I've been doing now. I've been writing online since 2022, so for over 3 years, and 2 years exclusively on LinkedIn. And you do have to put in essentially a year's worth of work to really see the fruits of your labor. What becomes apparent is your content is at the mercy of the algorithm. For any social media content, your content is at mercy of the algorithm, and the algorithm is a complex beast that changes over time, and you have to change and mold and adapt your content over time in order to adhere to that and for it to fit, and in order for your content to be seen and engaged with by your audience. I am massively bullish on tools that are serving a very niche market. That market is underserved, but it involves and it brings about a lot of deep proprietary knowledge that you get to infuse in that product, especially on this application layer that sits on top of LLMs. I see tremendous potential and alpha in those applications. So that was really where the impetus for GrowHub came to be. I see it as the go-to tool for anyone wanting to build a personal brand on LinkedIn. I'm a big believer that a personal brand is now 10 times more important than your CV, Liam.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Liam, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Before we get into you launching multiple AI businesses, growing to hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, closing massive enterprise contracts with UK supermarkets, I want to ask you a more personal question, throw you a bit of a curveball. If you had to give up one of the following 5 things, what would it be? Working out daily, waking up early, cold water, hot yoga, startups.
That is one of the toughest questions I've ever been asked, Liam, but I absolutely love it. All of those things deeply resonate with me on a very personal level, on a very intimate level. If I were to give up one of them, that is such a hard question because they all sort of help cement the pillars of my life, whether that be through fulfillment, education, mindfulness, a fit mind, a fit body. This is really tough. This is really tough. I'd say, I guess the one where I could budge a little bit would probably be on the waking up early. I think I'm happy to sort of give an hour or two in the direction of lateness, shall we call it. I think that shouldn't impact too many other things. I can probably go to bed a couple of hours later. Seems like a nice workaround to your very, very tough question to kick things off.
I love it. We're not doing any softballs today. Only hardball questions.
No, this is straight shooting, Liam. Straight shooting for the next hour.
All right, let's straight shoot into AI. Before we get into everything you're doing with GrowHub and Harley and everything else, I was wondering if you could tell me maybe the first time you heard about AI and kind of your first experiences with it. And maybe if you could paint me a picture of your experiences and your emotions at the time that you were first interacting with AI.
It was back in 2021. So we're talking 4 years ago now. I had just started my master's degree over at Imperial, and I'd heard of AI before. I'd heard of AI, big data, these sort of terms got thrown around a lot. A lot of people at the time were experimenting with chatbots on Facebook, actually. And it was really interesting because all of a sudden it sort of got my mind ticking as to the potential of where AI, and now we know it as generative AI since the emergence of ChatGPT back in November of 2022, where that could actually take you. And some of the emotions I were feeling were a lot surrounding the ideas of hope, intrigue, prosperity, and a really sort of visceral feeling of like what could be, because never in my life did I ever think that I could come and discover a technology that could be so transformative. Little did I know at the time when I stumbled across GPT-3 Playground by OpenAI. So this was before they had even thought about embedding a chat interface. When I first came across it, I was frankly amazed in that when you could write a sentence and have something complete that sentence, or write a very simple response to that sentence, and for it not to be hard-coded, for it not to be sent by another human, something in the air was able to generate that result. I had no clue about the fundamental underlying architecture behind it. I had no clue about transformers or anything like that. I just sort of saw this output. I was like, that was kind of cool. How did that came to be? And so there was a lot of, there was a lot of emotion and also a lot of curiosity. And I think that's what sort of led me to pursue the path that I did instead of doubling down on high-flying finance, because of just the potential to pursue that creativity. I'd always been interested in engineering, building stuff. And that was really what made me change tack quite early on in my career.
When did that curiosity turn into building? What was the first thing you ever created, launched with AI?
Yeah, this was back in the early days of TribeScaler. So TribeScaler was my first startup that I built. An AI writing tool to help you write hooks for Twitter posts, tweets, threads. And at the time, it was just a very, very simple function of essentially loading in some high quality hooks, having that as essentially few shotting the AI, and then the output be some variation of that. And seeing that, seeing that output, and then actually the immensely profound effect that has on an individual, where if you target a very niche use case, something that is a consistent pain problem for a lot of creators and a lot of folk who write on, well, Twitter, it was back in the day, how their eyes lit up when they saw it. This was before ChatGPT. So this was, we released that back in, I think it was September of 2022. So this was before the big ChatGPT moment, and seeing the early glimmers of Gen AI, come to market before that whole ChatGPT thing, was incredible, was absolutely incredible.
With you, what I find so amazing is the amount of things that you have going. So you've got Sunday Signal, the newsletter, you've got TribeScaler, you've now got GrowHub, which I'm really excited to get into today, and Harley as well. And I'm sure you probably get a few other things that we don't know about. If we were to take a peek behind the curtain, how are you using AI personally to kind of manage your time to be more efficient operationally?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I almost have to use AI in order to keep up and make sure that I'm not falling behind, essentially, because so much of my life has to be optimized in order to stay on that bleeding edge and make sure that everything's moving forward. All the plates are spinning concurrently, Liam. When I think about some of the tools that I like from an operational perspective, it is very broad spanning, and I'm sure we can double click into a couple of those today. I think from the outset, the emergence of agentic AI, so AI that can take action for you without having to continuously prompt it, I think has been fantastic. For example, with developing GrowHub, which we'll come into, being able to essentially help build a front end for a web application with very, very little prior engineering background, that is now a possibility for so many people. The requirement to be technical is now no longer a thing, because all you have to have is curiosity plus the ability to communicate using plain English, natural language, and being able to ask thorough questions. And if you can do both of those things, then you can essentially build a front end for your application. And that was exactly what I did for GrowHub. I was lucky enough to have had the guidance and support of a fantastic full stack engineer over in San Francisco, and him and I have built this concurrently. But by just having that freedom to go and explore and be creative, that's been absolutely tremendous. So the agentic AI that I use there is Cursor's agent. So Cursor, for those who don't know, is an IDE that leverages AI directly. Essentially, what you can do is go, I want to build a game of Flappy Bird. Help me. What language should I choose? How can I recreate it? Help me design the UI. All of these things, and it'll help you do exactly that. Things get a little bit more complicated when we're thinking about the back end, and maybe if we're thinking about infusing AI, there is some prerequisites such as understanding how databases work, how schemas work, how data structure works, how APIs work, things like that, which requires that sort of step up. But I think from the outset, getting to a very nice, efficient working prototype that is now available to everyone, and that's brilliant. So tools like Cursor, tools like V0 as well by Vercel, they have built a brilliant chat-enabled platform to build front end using ShadCN components, which is awesome. That's another favorite tool of mine. That's on the sort of development front. So if I'm sort of operating and wanting to improve a product, those are probably my two go-tos. And then in the day-to-day, Liam, having used those tools to help me build GrowHub and actually use GrowHub to help me with LinkedIn, maybe we can sort of segue across to LinkedIn itself. So operationally, I spend a ton of time there creating content, responding to comments, responding to messages. And a tool that I absolutely love to use there is a tool called WisprFlow, or Flow is the name of the tool. And this essentially enables me to use my voice instead of my keyboard when I am writing messages, answering comments. This doesn't have to be domain specific to LinkedIn. It could be across to Slack, it could be WhatsApp, it could be email. But being able to dictate your message using your voice instead of your keyboard saves me hours. It genuinely does. And I have no commercial affiliation with the company, but it just genuinely is a great tool. So that would be one for the sort of day-to-day in the weeds. Communication is the backbone of business, and I think that one there has been a real game changer for me. And then maybe another that I would highlight, also in that communication vein and that operating vein, like you mentioned, Liam, would be a company called Fixer. They are doing some great stuff in the email space when it comes to being able to write and compose and follow up emails in your own voice. They do a great job at holding that authenticity, and also their cross-pollination between your email and your calendar makes for that ecosystem to be quite complete. So those are just a few tools that either I've built myself or that I'm using myself in that sort of operational day-to-day lens that really help improve and speed up my workflows.
All of your public profiles, that it is you behind the AI or behind the screen actually commenting and posting on things. It's your tone of voice, it's the words you would choose. It's very Alex Banks. Why is authenticity so important to you?
You only get one shot at this life. And I think being able to find your voice, hone that and channel that and not waver on that, but do it in a way that is true to you and that just feels right. I talked about this visceral feeling, just something that feels right, that's deeply innate to you, has always been something that I learned very, very early on, especially coming from the early Twitter days, to be paramount, because that's what builds the trust at the end of the day when it comes to audience building. You can garner tremendous amounts of attention when it comes to creating content that probably sits to this end of the attention grabbing, maybe more on the sort of lacking authenticity, clickbaity attention grabbing lens, but you don't build the trust. In order to get the attention and build the trust, you sort of have to find where you situate yourself in that sliding scale. And I remember having a conversation. It was, anyone can sort of do almost like a quick sort of like podcast or tool carousel, TED Talks that make you $1 billion in the next 10 days, all those types of gigs. But it's almost like growing your following through power walking, right? Does power walking get you fit? Sure. But do you look like a complete idiot doing it? Completely. So that doesn't build trust, does it? It builds awareness, it builds attention, but it doesn't build trust. And that's where authenticity comes in. And that's why it's so important. And, that's just something that I've learned throughout time to be the most important thing. Even if you are foregoing followers in the short term, what you build is a far more engaged, authentic audience in the long run. And that for me is, heads and shoulders above anything in order to build that connection with my audience and build that real sense of community, as opposed to it just be a sea of people who saw a hyper viral post that you did one time and then have no clue who you actually are.
I think this is a great segue into GrowHub and what GrowHub does. I think you will have a better explanation than anyone of why it's an important tool and why it's pertinent now. So I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about the genesis of why you created GrowHub in the first place.
Yeah. GrowHub is something that is very close to my heart, Liam, because when I got started on LinkedIn, I was fresh-faced. It was probably the end of 2022. I had just been writing on Twitter for the time prior, and I really didn't have a clue what LinkedIn was all about. I knew that if I just repurposed a Twitter thread, it might do all right as a carousel, but I had no clue about the types of content that actually resonated on LinkedIn. And over the last 2 years of writing on the platform, what becomes apparent is your content is at the mercy of the algorithm. For any social media content, your content is at mercy of the algorithm. And the algorithm is a complex beast that changes over time, and you have to change and mold and adapt your content over time in order to adhere to that and for it to fit, and in order for your content to be seen and engaged with by your audience. Otherwise, it will just sit in the dark. And the idea for GrowHub came really at the sort of latter stages of 2024, where I was sort of creating content one day going, look, there are so many patterns and ideas and styles that I know effectively resonate on LinkedIn. A lot of my posts are text-based. They include, short, sharp, direct copy. And being able to have something, at the time it was using things like Claude projects or custom GPTs to try and help find that tone, that writing style. A lot of those were sort of being shared around in some of the creators that I have relationships with. And what I thought to be a far more effective solution was to just go and build something that I knew worked anyway. And really, that's where GrowHub came to be, was because being able to sort of package being able to build something that is a great packaging for a LinkedIn post made a ton of sense, because what it means is you can drop some text, your notes, maybe a blog post that you wrote. It could be a podcast that you recorded, and package that into something which has gone from content that was authentically you to something that is still you, but it's now geared and tailored to the platform that is LinkedIn. And I've only come to know that through writing on it for 2+ years. And I think I am massively bullish on tools that are serving a very niche market. That market is underserved, but it involves and it brings about a lot of deep proprietary knowledge that you get to infuse in that product, especially on this application layer that sits on top of LLMs. I see tremendous potential and alpha in those applications. So that was really where the impetus for GrowHub came to be, and why I see, and why a lot of people have already seen value in it as a tool, just because of how you can package these ideas in a way that ultimately rings true to LinkedIn.
Our listeners love practicality, so I think there's no better way to make this tangible than actually do a
100%.
live demo right now. So I'm going to share my screen for people that are listening. Alex, would you like to narrate for me, perhaps?
Right. We're diving into GrowHub. So GrowHub as a tool, when you first log in, you get presented with the create page. And this is really where you get to let your creativity run wild. So for today, what we can do is we can actually start with a blog URL. So we can actually paste this in. This is from the AI tool report. Liam, you may have heard of it. This is from a recent issue. And what we can do is select a style. Today, we're going to choose an insightful take. And there are really 3 signature styles right now. Insightful take, which is very much a thought-provoking perspective. A numbered list, very commonplace on LinkedIn today. You see them as listicles with some numbers, some emojis, and then also a personal experience. I'm going to give insightful take a go. And here you have the opportunity to add any additional context. What we have is the summarization of this blog post pulled from GrowHub. It's using the AI tool report blog. GrowHub is effectively summarizing all of the key information. And then we're actually going to turn this into a fully fledged LinkedIn post using this insightful take structure. So let's go ahead and click generate. Okay. So we're now pulled through to the editor, Liam. So on the left-hand side, you have the chat pane. The right-hand side, you have the content pane. And GrowHub segments this post into 3 key sections. So you've got the hook, the body, and the call to action. And a LinkedIn post wouldn't be complete without all 3. The hook, especially because it accounts for 80% of the value of your LinkedIn post. A great hook will get your content seen by users on LinkedIn. A bad hook, people will continue to scrolling. That's why it's so important to nail that first part of your LinkedIn post. We've then got the body, where we're using short, sharp, punchy structure, very short sentences to maintain attention throughout the read. And then finally, the call to action, which we can come onto at the end. And what we get here is from this summarized blog article, we get all of the key insights from that as a LinkedIn post with some very, very thoughtful copy too. So I think what's nice here is the answer that you get here is very, very different from, say, using a tool like ChatGPT going, make me a LinkedIn post from this, where it doesn't understand the packaging specifically for what a great LinkedIn post looks like. And we've been able to infuse this and fine tune our AI so that it can help deliver that to you directly on demand. So you have the opportunity to regenerate each section if you like it, and then also preview it. So this is really important to see what's above and below the fold on LinkedIn. So you've got 3 different devices here. You can see more, and this is really key because if you are a user on LinkedIn and you're scrolling on your feed, you only see the first 3 lines of the LinkedIn post if it includes a form of rich media. So I like to post a lot of videos. I like to attach a lot of images. Only the first 3 lines will appear. So it's really important to understand what's above and below the fold in order to get the most amount of attention. And then from here, right now, you can just add that to your calendar. So maybe I want to post this tomorrow. I can effectively add that to my calendar. And when I go across to here, what I can see is your sort of content layout, your content schedule, and the ability to move them around, to view it from a week and month view, change the time zone dependent on where you are in the world, and really have a lot of clarity as to what that posting schedule looks like, because consistency more than anything is absolutely key when it comes to creating content. And this is really what this early iteration of GrowHub looks like. You know, it's something which anyone can go from idea to action in a matter of seconds. And this is really important to essentially be the great enabler when it comes to creating content for LinkedIn, but also doing so in a thoughtful way where you get to leverage the sort of the learnings and secrets of what a great packaged post looks like and take that for yourself whilst infusing your own ideas and insights. So that's GrowHub in a nutshell.
Thank you for the live demo, Alex. I appreciate it. With this, because I was having a play around with this before, and insightful take reminds me a lot of your writing, and that not a single word is wasted. Like, how much has your influence as a writer, as a creator, impacted the development and creation of the product?
Yeah, it's impacted it massively. I think having iterated my own writing style many, many times throughout the last few years, I think you come to learn quite quickly, Liam, what works and what doesn't. And so making sure that you are receptive of those learnings and make sure that you iterate your writing style accordingly. Because, at the end of the day, the data never lies. It's really important to respect that and refine appropriately. Otherwise, your content will end up sitting in the dark. I think Einstein said, it's an idiot who does the same thing over and over again without expecting a change of results. You have to change the input in order to change the output. And that became very apparent when it came to writing on LinkedIn. So building a tool that could essentially tailor that writing style to me and enable other people to realize the benefit of that too, I think became massively powerful.
It's a very impressive first iteration 3 weeks in. Where do you see GrowHub in a year from now?
I see it as the go-to tool for anyone wanting to build a personal brand on LinkedIn. I'm a big believer that a personal brand is now 10 times more important than your CV, Liam. It's something which your prospective employer or partner or individual that you want to go into business looks at straight away. Outside of a single sheet of paper that outlines your experience, the first thing that I would do is go to Google and type in your name and see what you're all about. And so by having a personal brand, having a robust personal brand, and standing for something, seeing that this individual stands for something is so important. It doesn't have to be AI. It could be finance. It could be operational improvement. It could be fine art. It could be fly fishing for all I care. And I think being able to demonstrate credible expertise in a given area is massively, massively powerful. And so by building a tool that can essentially enable individuals to do that at scale, I think is brilliant, because all of a sudden you've gone from being an employee who's working very, very hard to now actually being an operator who is exploring their curiosity and being able to leverage AI thoughtfully so that you're demonstrating extended credibility over time. And if you do that, man, the opportunities and possibilities that emerge from that, if you are consistent, is tremendous. I can tell you that firsthand. These opportunities afforded to me today through business, through the relationships, through friendships, have all been, or at least in part, through the content, through the ideas that I share and promote online. So there really is no excuse not to get started, given that the upside is so massive. And when we see this phase shift now, where the world is going when it comes to everything being digitized, everyone's personal presence be absolutely vital when it comes to extending and leveling up your career. A personal brand is that sort of foundational layer that has to be consistent, and I would highly recommend everyone start building.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the reason that I'm in the position I am today is because of the work I did on the personal branding side. A little Easter egg is that I had you on my podcast a year and a half ago when I ran a different podcast called This That, which is how we first got introduced to each other as individuals. And that led me more into this sphere and stuff like that. So that was all through a podcast I ran myself, had a Twitter account, and that's how I met Martin, so the founder of the AI Report as well. And it's all through all through work that I'd done in a public domain. And no one ever asked what degree I got, how I did in university. It was never of any importance. It's how hard can you graft and what work do you have in a public domain? Are you willing to put yourself out there? So yeah, I'm in total agreement. I think this kind of builds on what you said earlier when you were talking about Vercel, VO, and Cursor, and how a lot of this kind of front end development has become possible without too much of a technical background. And something I'm really curious about is like your kind of process of building GrowHub and the other tools you've used, or the other tools you've built so far. Maybe for people that haven't built anything using AI, what's something that's been harder than you expected, and what's something that's been easier than you expected in the process of building?
What a great question. Maybe we can start with the harder end of that, Liam. So What's been harder than I expected throughout this journey? I think how long it takes before you start to see real momentum kick in. I was under the impression that I can post a couple of times a week, maybe a month, and I might see some real bangers emerge, see some real progress. Yeah, that ain't it. This is something that I've been doing now. I've been writing online since 2022, so for over 3 years, and 2 years exclusively on LinkedIn. And you do have to put in essentially a year's worth of work to really see the fruits of your labor really come to be. I think for me, in my case, I was expecting takeoff to be far sooner, given how much time I committed to it. I had the benefit of being studying for a postgraduate degree. I was studying for my master's degree over at Imperial College London, and so the time that I had between full-time study as well as writing, be it through X, previously Twitter, and a newsletter, I thought, okay, give it a couple of months and I'll be good. No, actually, showing up for the best part of 6 to 9 months consistently, and then sort of starting to see, okay, I've actually built a couple of cool relationships here. But the absolute common thread is you just have to give so much value before you ever expect anything in return. You just have to, and I think this comes very true with the relationships that you build too. Being able to treat a relationship as a cool option for some time in the future, where you don't know where that individual is going to be or where you're going to be, but knowing that by giving a lot of value early on, you're making sure that you're building that relationship on solid ground, and that the exercise price will be, far greater than you ever imagined. And so that for me was really the hardest part of it. It was, not expecting, expecting that it would be far quicker than what it was. And I guess the saying comes true in that it happens slowly and then all at once, and then things, and then you sort of start to see the momentum kickstart and the flywheel, those early quiet cranks of the flywheel starting to pull over. And that's where it gets quite exciting, because the biggest danger then is to sort of let your foot off the gas and go, I'm good, that's it. And that was something that I was, almost leaning into. But actually, the really big idea is, when things are, when you find something working, to not ease off, to actually double down on that. And that is really where the best opportunities find themselves. So that would be the hardest thing. And then the easiest thing, I think the easiest thing would just be how many opportunities come to you if you are just your authentic self, if you stay genuine and true to who you are and don't put on a front or a facade and just be authentically you. People online, and also whether that be through social media, or if you're taking the relationship off the platform, whether you're having a Zoom or a coffee chat, how much people resonate with people who are doing real things, who are being genuinely useful, who aren't in it for a quick buck. That is where the best relationships are always found. And that for me was, I guess, the easiest thing, because I thought you had to, be someone in order to get in these rooms. And it turns out if you're just consistent enough and stand for one thing and are true to yourself, true to that authentic self, like we mentioned at the start of this conversation, Liam, great things do start to happen. And I think that's the real beauty of, putting yourself out there. Sure, there are going to be many, many occasions where people tell you, why are you doing this? You're wrong, you're silly, you're stupid. But actually sort of having that unwavering belief that I'm just going to show up and have that accountability and have that consistency and just be true to my voice, then, I think you'd be doing yourself a massive favor. And, if you have the freedom to do that, by God, go all in.
This conversation is not going where I expected it to go, but I'm glad that we're going down this exact direction, because I think you're touching on such a unique point that's maybe not talked about enough. This idea of building and delivering value without expectation. And I found that to be massively beneficial in the space as well when I was writing online, producing podcasts, putting people in good positions, making introductions. It was never with an expectation, oh, I will get this back in the future, I will get this back in the future. And for me personally, taking that from business and then applying that to my personal life, being more selfless rather than selfish, has improved my life tenfold, because I think people's plight comes from the disparity between their expectations and reality. And if you never really have any defined expectations of what people should do or how they should act, and the only thing that you can control is how you act and how you deliver value and how you show up, then there's never any disparity there. So it's been a huge lesson for me personally as well. So I'm really glad that you touched on it.
Yeah. And I think to reflect that one step further, Liam, people often think that life is zero sum, in that in order for you to win, I can't win, therefore I'm not going to support you. But actually, life overwhelmingly is a positive sum game where everyone can win together. And if you invest in these relationships, like I said earlier, the net benefit that you get from building mutual support and building mutual trust, it quickly becomes apparent that the positive sum nature of life starts to pop its head above the canvas. And that for me was just massively refreshing, because, coming from a world of finance where it's, dog eat dog, it's cutthroat, it's ruthless. And I guess that zero sum game is played out. Turning to the lens of business and content, those two veins where investing early in relationships, putting your customer first, just being a great listener, communicating well, that positive sum game really starts to get exciting.
I'm conscious of time because we've got 10 minutes left. So I think what we're best doing is leaving Harley to an entirely different podcast, perhaps months from now, because I would like to kind of lead down this rabbit hole that we're already on. I want to propose a hypothetical to you. I want you to imagine all of your businesses and everything you've currently built and done so far spontaneously combusts because Thanos snapped into thin air. You have to start again today, Wednesday, the 12th of February, 2025. What would you focus on? What would you build? How would you spend your time knowing what you know now?
Yeah, it's such a great question. If everything went poof, everything disappeared, where would I spend my time? What would I do in order to follow this axiom, this truth that I'm a massive believer in, which is building a better future with AI? And really where I would first direct my attention is to just being useful at a high value, high leverage skill. That could be, well, take design for one, where if you can effectively compose great designs, whether that be for presentations, infographics, website development, app development, being a great designer is something that I think is able to be self-taught very, very well. I think some of the best designers I've seen have just been self-taught. And by just honing in on a single high value skill and then offering that as a service, it being coupled to your time initially, and then ultimately productizing that, I think to present a massive opportunity, because in the world where code is becoming commoditized, really anyone could now become a designer when it comes to, I need to develop a new structure for my landing page. I can now offer that as a service because I'm just using V0 to build these mockups, and it's doing all the code in the back end. And I can literally send these to clients after doing 99 variations and just spending my time and thinking about asking good questions. That already is a massive opportunity, and people pay, extortionately large amounts of money in order to get something good. And that would probably be one massive opportunity. So just honing in on a very high value, high leverage skill would be really a first point of call to build that initial infrastructure. Step two would then be how I can afford scale with that. So given that I am coupling my output to my time, the function that I get out is really what I put in. And so being able to scale that to perhaps an agency offering or something where you're including more people, I think you're able to do that when you are building credibility. So I think prioritizing these early relationships, and I think the best way to do that is to just put yourself out there online, build, literally write down the names of people who you aspire to form an affinity and form a relationship with. Literally write them down, save the links to their X accounts, LinkedIn accounts, YouTube accounts, Instagram accounts, and make a note of when they post every single day. And if you build this sort of list, and literally this is how I got started, which was I saw 5 to 10 people who I massively aspired to be around and form a relationship with, and I just showed up in their comment section online for a period of about 3, 4, 5 months, and all of a sudden they then start responding to you because you're actually adding value to the comments. Instead of just writing nice post, you're actually being additive to the conversation. And if you do that over a long period of time with people who are above you, people who are at the same stage of you, and maybe people who are that other step down as well, you're sort of building this network, this sort of ascending network. That term just came to me. You can have that one for free. But what it essentially is you're now sort of building this affinity and building these relationships. And at the end of the day, as I've mentioned in this podcast, it's all about the people. If you're able to build a high value skill, you can self-teach yourself and talk about it, talk about what you're learning, right? You go, I've learned front end design over the last month. You can literally tweet about it, write about it, make a video about it, and there'll be someone out there who resonates because they're wanting to do what you're doing. And that's the beauty in sharing your thoughts, because then if you do that over a long enough period of time, as I mentioned, you can productize your offering, you can scale that offering, and then you can decouple your output from your time and actually earn with your mind and not your time, something that Naval says famously. And then all of a sudden, you're sitting on a bit of an audience, you're sitting on a very, very high value skill, and the opportunities are endless from there, whether that be through software, through hardware, through a bricks and mortar business, through real estate. There are so many ways to make money and to work on something meaningful to you. But I think, at least in the initial, focusing on that high value skill, high leverage skill, probably is number one, something that is very, very valuable to others, and that is actually achievable to you if you have that curiosity and drive and intent behind just teaching yourself.
It's a super interesting response, and I asked the same question to Eric Jorgensen about 4 weeks ago now, and you had almost identical responses, which is very, very interesting. A lot of conversation about leverage, about network, about authenticity, and specifically about building a better future with AI.
Yeah, well, it's funny enough, his book, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, I listened back in the early days of 2021, and I that book was massively formative to a lot of my thinking and a lot of my ideas today. So huge shout out to Eric and Naval for making something spectacular.
From that question, I have my last and final question, and I ask this to everyone, and I will provide no further context, so just take it as you will. Why do you do what you do?
I have a very deep rooted desire to be useful in the domain of artificial intelligence. It's something which sparked my curiosity many years ago now. And I think there will never be a technology that will diffuse as fast as AI. In our lifetimes, it is way quicker and way faster than what we can get from humans. It is intelligence on demand, and being at the forefront of that when it comes to education, helping people learn how to leverage it usefully, but then also implementation, how you can actually benefit the lives of so many people when they are able to use tools that are useful to them and solving their problems, I think is absolutely brilliant. And we are only 2 and a bit years in since the ChatGPT moment of November 2022, since AI has gone mainstream. And I think the applications and opportunities that will emerge over the next 3, 5, 10 years will be incredible. My whole intent was that I'm going to drop everything and just focus on this, because I know it is going to change a lot of people's lives, with the intent that it would change my life too. And that is why I do what I do.
If people want to hear more from you, learn more from you, find out about what you're doing, how do they get in touch?
I write quite a bit on LinkedIn. You can find me there at Alex Banks. And then I also write a weekly newsletter every Sunday called The Signal AI. And you can check me out there as well.
Alex, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Liam. Thank you so much for having me.